This Alicization Explained is brought to you by the information that War of Underworld is returning April 2020 with 11 more episodes, so please stop asking about it. Sword Art Online Alicization War of Underworld episode 12 brings us to another break, as Sinon descends in a ray of light, melting the horror and hopelessness in Asuna's heart, while Gabriel Miller is on his way to the world's end altar to the south with Alice in the grasps of his mind-washed dragon, with the manliest man alive, Commander Berkuli, giving chase right behind him with haste. With the inclusion of Vasago's Lovkov tease, we had 3 major cliffhangers in a single episode. Welcome everyone, it's me Gamerturk, your most reliable source of Sword Art Online information, with Alicization Explained featuring War of Underworld episode 12 Ray of Light. As always, timestamps to individual plot points are down below for easy navigation with an overview, but to give you a quick rundown, it's incredible how you can tell things are rushed the moment anime decides to adapt over 45 pages of content. The past couple of weeks, we always adapted between 35 to 45 pages, and despite skips here and there, it was still a borderline perfect adaptation. This week, we adapted 50 pages and boom, the episode just became such a non-stop roller coaster that if you look back at the episode, you will constantly find multiple different background musics chaining into each other, not even smoothly transitioning, mind you, simply because they tried cramming as much as possible to reach Sinon. The funniest bit is that the solution was as simple as letting one of the 3 cliffhangers, namely the Vasago tease, be shown at the beginning of the next core and use those additional 4-5 minutes for more Underworld scenes to let things breathe a bit, just ever so slightly, enough to avoid awkward scene and music transitions at least, but I'm getting ahead of myself. If you're new to my Explained series, what I do here is essentially provide you all the vital information on characters, events, action, lore from the source material, light novels, things that the anime did not convey properly or just did not have the time to, so you can still see the full picture. So make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to not miss any of the details in the upcoming weeks. Well, we have a break in the upcoming weeks, but I got other plans. And gain an immunity shield against the pawns of Emperor Vecta, swiftly spreading misinformation and uncontrolled spoilers like a pack of foxes. But then again, if you want to read the books for yourselves for the amazing experience, Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links are in the description, and the knowledge of Stacia awaits you there. Detailed summary, and of course where you should start reading from during the break to continue where the anime left off. Episode 12 adapted from Volume 17, Alicization Awakening, Chapter 20, Midway Part 1, to Midway Part 2, about 50 pages roughly. We left off exactly on page 55 of Volume 17, however the anime glossed over Higa's explanation of Solus's abilities, probably to put into the next core of course, so if you're going to start reading, I strongly recommend you start from the section break on page 53, which is the start of Solus's descent from Sinon's perspective. Again, links to light novels are in the description, and I strongly recommend Book Depository for a fast and reliable delivery to continue from where we left off. Grab Volume 17 Alicization Awakening, and of course Volume 18 Alicization Lasting is coming out first week of 2020, so you may as well get that one too if you're gonna read further. V17 ends with a very nasty cliffhanger, so go ahead and grab Volume 18 as well. But what about the content adapted? Well, with another major event of the war beginning, there's once again a whole lot of stuff going on. The pages they are adapting are already packed with a lot of stuff compared to the prior stuff, and then the anime also tried to ramp it up from adapting 40 pages like they did in the previous couple of weeks into adapting 50 pages, and you can imagine the results. You know, sometimes even as an anime only, you can sense there are things that are moving a bit too fast from a contextual standpoint. One of the earlier FGO episodes, for example, simply skipped an event and shortly talked about it happening. And then there are times when the anime is so dedicated to cram as much stuff as possible that events just start melding into each other, start cutting each other off constantly, leading to awkward transitions, and due to how things are awkwardly shifting, music becomes a mess as well. Episode 12 was exactly that. Also, tons of minor skips, I have to say. Naturally, I won't mention every single nook and cranny this week, we already have a long video. There's also the passionate anime defense squad people out there that for some reason use light novels in an attempt to make a point when I say the cliffhanger animation design simply did not work as a cliffhanger, just like back in episode 24. They keep saying it's the middle of the book, so the scenes themselves weren't designed as cliffhangers, which is utter bullshit. First off, if you want to shit on me for having light novel knowledge, From a completely argumentative standpoint, you probably shouldn't be using light novel knowledge to justify yourself, you know, that's what you're blaming me of, that just makes you a hypocrite. Secondly, the argument completely falls apart when the episode had 3 cliffhangers already, one of which was adapted greatly, and one of the 2 cliffhangers, Sinon's Descent, is a carbon copy of Asuna's Descent, which was wonderfully adapted as an episode cliffhanger just 2-3 weeks ago. I am open to criticism, but to be frank, I believe it's kinda reasonable that there's a minimum base logic I require before I take it seriously. This is also a great time to mention that Twitter is a terrible place and I wouldn't be using it if it wasn't the fastest way for me to share the news with you. Anyways, that rant took long enough, I guess. Let's begin with the episode, and I am shifting the format a little bit this week to suit the needs of this episode. You see, the contents of this episode is not all that different in terms of perspectives compared to something like the episode 6 or 7, where the perspective of the camera was constantly on the shift from character to character, from scene to scene. So please do follow me for a bit, because this is one of those reasons why this episode feels jumbled. Back when the war first began, the anime staff was aware of one thing. While the constant perspective shifts were exhilarating and exciting in a light novel because the medium allowed such a structure, it would be terrible, jarring design for the anime to adapt it. What the anime did as a result was to turn the events into big blocks of continuity rather than adapting page by page, shifting the perspective every single time it shifts in the books. Despite all events taking place at roughly the same time, the anime crew brought coherent moments together and presented them as one block to keep it away from being a jumbled mess. A bunch of Gabrielle Miller scenes were constantly omitted in the early episodes and presented later when they were relevant to what was already happening at the time. A lot of war scenes were shuffled in chronology so that we would, for example, only go back between Düsselbert and Fanatio in that one episode and not 50 different perspectives at once. That kept the narrative flow of the episode itself going properly and perfectly. And they have decided to not do what they have done in the past 11 episodes this week for whatever reason they have. Sure, you may argue, oh, but Gamerturk, this is no longer perspectives and different scenes, it's one linear timeline, you can't shuffle the chronology around. Yes, you can't shuffle the war scenes, but this episode did not solely consist of war scenes, did it? Let's begin, and let me provide you the ground structure of this episode. I'm gonna highlight the structure in scene blocks that I mentioned earlier, so a major perspective or scene transition creates a new block. That's essentially it, and during the course of this video, I'll rearrange certain scenes to optimize the narrative and save valuable screen time this episode severely needed. Don't worry, we'll have actual explanations as well where needed, but as I said, I won't dwell over every minuscule change this week because there's just too much. Anyways, our episode consists of Block 1, Americans arrive in human army perspective, Block 2, Iskhan's eyeball rip, Block 3, human army keeps fighting and Asuna slips, Block 4, Iskahn saves Asuna, Asuna creates bridge, Block 5, Alice gets kidnapped, Block 6, news of Alice reaches Asuna, Block 7, Vasago wakes up, this takes almost 4.5 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. Block 8, large crater ambush and Solus's descent. Block 9, the post-credits Vasago scene. I mean, just from that alone, you can already see that we have way too many major transitions to sustain reliably, but regardless, first block, the Americans. They descend and they bring democracy to Underworld the only way they know how, with a major massacre of Underworldians. The first block is not very long, but it has good adaptation overall. Asuna takes a major risk by utilizing her terraforming ability in a big way one last time and borderline crumbles apart due to the strain on her flaklight, making her feel like there are sparks coming out of her eyes, that much of an headache. The anime makes it very clear that the Dark Territory members are just as confused that the Americans simply don't care who their allies are. The key point is that Americans simply think this is a game and everything they come across is simply a mob to be killed, so they legitimately have no reason to not kill anybody. When they were diving, they weren't even given instructions, and obviously Underworld does not have a quest system like actual games do provide them with a direction, so all they care about is to simply enjoy this not age-rated game with super realistic effects to its fullest. So you can't even blame the Americans for being ignorant, they simply have no way of knowing in this case. And to add to that, everybody in Underworld simply speaks Japanese, a foreign language to Americans. Our first instinct playing games is to assume if they don't speak our language, they're probably the enemy. The one major thought Asuna had before using her ability was to actually combat that one specific thing. She knew sufficient English to communicate with them, to explain them what was really happening, but the problem with that was that it was very likely the Americans would assume she was simply an NPC and try to kill her as well. Only after deciding it was impossible to convince such a mob did she actually decide to use her ability as Stacia. She wanted to use her ability again afterwards and lifted her radiant light up to create another wall adjacent so that the human army would be able to escape, but thankfully Alice stopped her and they went back to properly fighting. With that, we switch to block 2. Iskahn grows even more dubious of the Emperor as his people are being slaughtered by the supposed reinforcements. This block is by far my favorite in the entire episode. It has incredible animation, incredible voice acting, and as solid of an adaptation as you can get without proper inner monologues. It's a great scene overall. The main explanation you need here is what Iskahn actually did, because the anime without a narrator can't really, pinpoint what really happened. You see, Yuji and Alice had broken their seals, their eyes had exploded because they were so determined to go against the rules. That was not what Iskahn did. At that point, Iskahn was thinking about simply retreating and thus going against the Emperor's orders. That was why he had received the seal of the right eye, and that's also why he wanted to report his decision to the Emperor, to actually circumvent that, to not go against the rules. However, when he saw Vecta already observing the field closely from above, that was no longer an option, since that option solely relied on the assumption that Vecta did not know what was happening. Now, he didn't need to report anything to Vecta, he knew what was going on already and was not giving him any orders to retreat regardless, which meant his previous order to Iskahn was still in place, and thus Iskahn needed to find another way to save his people. But as he pondered further, the pain in his right eye grew more and more, so painful that he could no longer think properly. So, what do you do when doing something hurts so much? Well, normal people usually stop. Some rare special people break through the obstacles no matter the pain. Iskahn, however, came from a line of pugilists. Their entire culture was about withstanding the ultimate physical pain. He knew what pain was, and he knew the pain in his right eye was not a normal pain. It was beyond any physical pain possible, preventing him from thinking properly, so much so that he preferred actual physical pain over this mental pain ringing inside his head. So the solution was clear as daylight for Iskahn. Deal with the physical pain of the eye, not with the mental pain of the seal. Thus, he simply ripped his eye off. Again, going back, this was solely because he wanted to think properly without the seal distracting him, and since he never blew up the seal itself, he still can't go against the orders. He's fully aware of that, but to save his people, he didn't need to break the rules. His orders were to cross the ravine, and there were no orders to not go against the reinforcements, so with a clear mind, a plan was made. Cross the ravine at all cost, then kill off every single reinforcement to save his people. So Iskahn jumped, and Dampa is an absolute bro. His arm fucking exploded, by the way, if you haven't realized. But moving on, block 3 is titled "Quick guys, we need to show the scale of the war, we're kinda running out of time" block. Asuna's voice actor and the small quick action bits here and there are the saving graces of this block. Asuna's scream here is absolutely incredible, but this is also the bit where we see both pugilists and human army rushing towards the horde of Americans. Then we're shown more Americans walking towards them, as if that wasn't clear enough before, for about 8 seconds, and then we see the same shot from above, but the pugilists and human army run away just like they came. Such scene design is bad on the level of those CG goblins back during this all that fight. That's my main complaint here in block 3, the rush to convey everything in such a short time that it wasn't reasonable in the first place. But that brings me to first of my time efficiency measures, the minor one out of the two. You see, this was an episode where every second counted since it was so packed. Before I go into my suggestion, I want to add a disclaimer. First, naturally, my suggestion is a macro design suggestion. Obviously, other micro decisions need to be made to make the large block shifting to work, and that micro work won't be covered in my suggestion. That's an entirely different topic on its own. But yeah, the underlying logic is that the more major transitions you have, the more you need to spend time to establish each new scene, and thus the goal is to simply minimize transitions to optimize the overall flow to save up on time by bundling relevant blocks together, just like what the anime has done to a great extent dozens of times in the previous episodes. Going back to the episode structure, we currently have 3 blocks behind us. Block 1, Americans arrive, Block 2, Iskhan's eyeball, and Block 3, human army keeps fighting and Asuna slips, and 1 block to tie into, which is Block 4, Iskahn saves Asuna and Asuna creates the bridge. 4th block means 3 transitions to reach it, but this can be brought down to a single transition altogether with a simple shift. Simply put, swap our current Block 2 and Block 3, cover the entire human perspective as Block 1 altogether, and once those 2 are bundled, you've already saved the transition, and this block ends with Asuna sleeping and about to die. Then we make a transition over to Iskahn by going a little bit to the past. This is easy to signal to the viewer with, basic visual cues like simply showing the red light hue on Iskhan's face again to signal that we're just a little bit back in time for the entrance of the Americans. Doesn't even take additional time to establish it, it's just an additional visual cue you can just slap over to the scene. And then we go through all the stuff. Iskahn rips his eye, jumps over, and now, since we already experienced what Asuna experienced in the previous scene, we don't even need a transition here. Just keep Iskahn running, maybe a single second flash on screen with Asuna's face, and boom, just carry on as if there was no transition at all, which leads us to the next block, previously mentioned as Block 4, Iskahn saves Asuna and gets the bridges back up, which was changed from the novels in a very minor way, but in the novels Iskahn was a little bit more graceful when he was getting Asuna back up to her feet. He had extended his hand for Asuna to hold on to instead of, I think he just grabs her by the shoulder and forcefully pulls her up. I'm not all that sure. Iskahn, if you were on a football pitch, you would have received a red card for that. That's not graceful at all. Especially when you're trying to convince someone that you're not the bad guy. Thank God Sheta was there. See what I did there? I too have masterfully transitioned from a structure explanation into a contextual explanation. I am master of transitions, thank you very much. Transitioning to Block 5 is inevitable though, as we go back into the middle of the war where Integrity Knights are fighting, and Alice sorta kinda had a plan. She had been fighting for a while now and had realized the abnormality of the Knights in Red. They were hollow, they had no strategy, no discipline, they did not care for the lives of their comrades as they stepped onto the bodies of their fallen members, nor did they care about their deaths, even their own, as they sloppily attacked as if they were throwing their life away for seemingly no reason. Not one that an Integrity Knight living in Underworld can understand anyways. But in the midst of the battle, she briefly saw an opening which was heading towards a small hill. That was the moment she made up her mind. She would get there and she would create a quick beam via Sacred Arts to burn down all the Red Knights for good. When she finally managed to break through, however, and started running through the empty field and towards the hill, her immediate vicinity suddenly got dark. Unlike the anime where she actually looked up for multiple seconds enough to realize something was approaching and jump away, in the novels, she didn't have the reflexes of a 70-year-old when she was covered by shade. She had simply assumed it was a cloud covering the sun, but was suddenly picked up by a large force clamping on her shoulder. The rider of the dragon was not even visible, but once she tried to use her perfect weapon control to break free from the dragon, she suddenly started to feel tired, as if her entire mind was going blank. It wasn't Sacred Arts, it may not have even been an active measure by the Emperor, it was like incarnation, heavier than even Commander Berkuli's. Alice could not stand against it, and that was the last conscious thought she would have for a while. I already mentioned my issue with this scene in that comparison alone. In the anime, Alice actively looks above and sees something approaching. It's basic survival instinct that if a large object is approaching at you at a fast speed, you simply move some other way without thinking. That's reflex. And there are people claiming it was perfectly realistic and how Alice would probably be confused and not instantly understand the dragon was closing in to catch her, which is completely irrelevant. Large object coming towards you equals you jump the fuck out of the way. The same people also then start citing that, oh, but it's fight, flight or freeze, most humans are the third type, to which I have to say, fuck you. This is the third ranking Integrity Knight, not Renly, who was disavowed for his tendency to freeze, but a sacred arts and sword fighting master that has been made the third ranking Integrity Knight in mere half a decade of training. This is the knight who fought multiple creepy minions on a 30 cm ledge, the person who fought against the sword golem without being scared, destroyed multiple battalions of the Dark Army. You literally don't have the luxury of claiming she may have been so shocked by an aerial object that she froze, unable to flee. That's why I say the novels did it better. She had destroyed a majority of the Dark Knights and their dragons earlier up north when they were going into battle. They had surveyed around and there were no flying dragons, so she simply had no reason to assume a single stray dragon would be above for no reason at all, and thus assumed it was just a cloud and never looked up. Simple as that. Anyways, that's my nitpick of Block 5, Alice gets kidnapped. We have Gabriel's perspective here that was skipped, but nothing too much. It's mostly the narrator explaining how his incarnation felt like a void that consumed things, how he was using it without realizing, how he basically brainwashed the dragon thanks to this, and basically made a gamble that Alice would probably eventually be separated from the large group for another big attack, which had paid off and allowed him to grab Alice with ease the moment she broke free of the horde. That was also the reason why Berkuli tried telling Alice not to run off on her own. You see, the anime adapted Alice getting grabbed, still in the middle of the horde, which would be very difficult for the dragon to simply grab her, and Berkuli, having about 200 plus more years of experience over Alice, he knew you should always expect the unexpected. That's why he tried to shout to her right before, there may not have been any dragons around before, but it doesn't mean no dragons will arrive. Alice, still being a novice knight, has no real war experience. She was always sheltered in the central cathedral. She was skilled in combat and arts, yes, but didn't know how to handle on her own in a full-fledged war. And that was what bit her in the back, as a giant claw of a dragon grabbed her the moment she broke through the horde, because she simply assumed there were definitively no dragons around before the fight, and the shadow must have simply been a cloud. But with that, we shift again over to Block 6. Asuna receives the news of Alice's kidnapping and that Berkuli is in the chase. Now, here comes some drops and changes to shorten the content. We see the pugilists in perfect formation, and that is actually what had Asuna's attention, not the healing of her arm here. What the pugilists were doing was essentially the basic switch formation Asuna knew from SAO and Halo. Use a skill, deflect, switch back for another row to take the next leap. It was the next best thing compared to combination sword skills that featured multiple hits, and the flawless execution of switching had her certainly impressed. The same fascination Kirito felt when he had encountered and had to outplay Fanatio's whirling blades on the 50th floor of the central cathedral. Either way, that's just a detail. More importantly, Asuna had not healed her arm here, not completely at least, which led to dropping an entire scene afterwards to speed up the content. With Sheta and Iskahn deciding to stay back, making it very clear to each other that they would most certainly fight to their deaths, even stating to each other that fighting side by side was not a bad way to die. That was very reminiscent of a certain Lord of the Rings scene, but anyways, with this development, Asuna, having sealed her arm wound, arrived back in the carriage that had Kirito, but Kirito, having sensed the massacre outside, had already left his wheelchair trying to crawl out, while Ronnie and Tiza had pinned him down on the ground so he wouldn't go outside. When he realized Asuna had arrived with a major wound on her arm, not a major wound on her arm, it was her entire arm that was completely severed, he once again stopped everything and tried reaching for Asuna, and only then Asuna actually had proper time to heal her arm, not with sacred arts, but actually regrowing it via incarnation. With Sorterina coming back from the war scene as well and being put in charge of pinning Kirito in his place so it doesn't cause any unnecessary distractions, Asuna returns to Renly, since with Berkuli's absence, Sheta staying back, he is the only Integrity Knight who can give the orders, and the human army departs for south. Which leads us into Block 7, Vasago waking up, which takes roughly 4 minutes and 40 plus seconds. This I find absurd. In such an episode they are trying to cut corners to buy time left and right. Sure, the bit where Kirito explains that a second wave of Americans are being locked in is kinda topical, but this scene is not mandatory at all, and if you haven't read the novels, do trust me when I say this scene has two intended objectives. One is to explain the second wave of Americans, the second is something the anime has not included at all, with Vasago giving Kirito his login ID from another game. That ID starting with the letters SAO. The thing is, both of these will be covered in the next core once again in the next episode or two, and they were not even necessary to understand what was happening back in Underworld. And this event is taking 5 minutes of screen time, a quarter of an entire episode, when prior blocks literally chopped everything around to save seconds. To be frank, this block is the elephant in the room this week. With so much happening, this block should have just been pushed into the next core. I mean, not even pushed. All of these we will retread again regardless in the next core anyways, when we see where exactly Vasago was hiding as he was locked in, etc. Quarter of an entire episode didn't even give the scene justice and tease what it primarily needed to. For an explanation that could have been given much more efficiently in the next episode, this block is just sadness and a waste of time. Why is it a waste of time? Because it led to the entire Block 8 being butchered. I think the easiest way to start this would be a light jab at the anime. Asuna majestically jumped down with her horsey, but how the fuck did those carry just come down that hill? Anyways, there are two key bits before we even get to see Sinon. One was not adapted emotionally at all, and the other one completely skipped. So let's start with that one. Asuna was already affected by negative incarnation a couple of times so far in her time in Underworld. She had been utterly scared and felt hopeless multiple times, which was the main reason why her arm was easily cut off, for example, among many other things, why she had lost her composure, etc. She had promised herself to never falter again, but the moment she had seen the new set of enemies arrive, she was borderline crying. All power in her legs vanished in that instant. As a last-ditch attempt, knowing she wouldn't be able to do anything else afterwards, she prepared herself to use Statia's ability one last time and be forced locked out, only to be stopped by the roar of Renly's dragon as it rushed forward, with Renly sharing a final look. It was obvious to everyone who saw his face, Renly was not preparing to return. Asuna, however, was not going to let another artificial floodlight give away their only life, but events kept unraveling back to back that constantly stopped Asuna from taking some sort of action. Only then did Asuna notice the beam of light that stopped both Renly and the Americans from doing anything, a silhouette in shining bright blue descending in the middle. And the rest is as you see them, more or less. Sinon with her bow Annihilation Ray that automatically recharged special resources over time, unlike Dussolbert's Conflagration bow, who had to funnel the resources into his bow to shoot those flamey arrows. Of course, since we spent almost 5 minutes with Vasago and Kirito, the bits where Higa explained Sinon her abilities were cut out, but they'll probably somewhat cover it after the break, or just assume after 3 months nobody will remember to ask the question, so they won't bother answering it at all, who knows. Anyways, when watching that action scene, can you guess who animated it? Come on, try. Of course it's fucking Kanno. Whenever there's something exciting going on screen, it's 80% Kanno, 20% Takeuchi. The guy is an absolute powerhouse. It's just incredible, I got no words to say. Now that I shared my praises for the guy once again, just like every other episode, who the hell in Alicization Anime project is deciding on what is a cliffhanger or not? They had the exact same scene but with Asuna as a perfect cliffhanger just a couple episodes ago to keep people excited for a mere week. Now they got a 3+ month period break in front of them and they mess up the cliffhanger completely. How did they do this? The exact same scene is worked differently here. It's not a proper cliffhanger on one side, but it's not a scene that's properly conclusive either on the other side. It's floating somewhere in the middle that doesn't work for any purpose at all. And also to those people saying, Herder, it's the middle of the book, there are no cliffhangers. Screw you, Statia's arrival was mid-book, that was a perfect cliffhanger. Alice's rage was middle of the book, that was a perfect cliffhanger. Entire Alicization is a cliffhanger. Every episode has 2 perfect cliffhangers at the bare minimum. Stop being so apologetic. Whoever is in charge of designing break cliffhangers has utterly failed. This is the second instance. Every single weekly cliffhanger is adapted perfectly, but core break cliffhangers, first one destroying the ending of volume 14, Alicization uniting entirely, making people think that Asuna dived all the way back there, completely reading the gut-punching words of Kirito, whose voice is that, and now Sinon's debut has been ended not at a cliffhanger moment, but also not at a conclusive moment, just put there into the middle. Somehow, it even feels like the anime itself is confused as to how this is an ending, with the abrupt edits and then cutting straight to the ED with nothing happening. Either way, at least Block 9, the post-credit scene was kind of a perfect tease for those who realized who Vasago is. Let's be real, most have realized back in episode 1 of the Human Empire arc when they saw the tattoo anyways. That was a great post-credit scene, I'll clap for that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I made all the points I wanted to make in this video. Hopefully I did, at least this was a long one, so I probably lost track somewhere. Anyways, next episode is titled The War of Underworld. We really don't know where Crunchyroll conjured the word great and made it into the Great Underworld War. That was kind of silly. But yeah, I'm surprised the next episode is not titled something related to Terraria, but I guess they're saving that for when she actually properly gets some screen time with a major action sequence, which has me excited, let's be real. What should you expect after the break? The chase to the south with Major Berkuli screen time, some Terraria and Lilpilin moments, and the return of a wizard, allies from other worlds, and a ghost from the past haunting all of them throughout. For more information, please check my introduction to Alicization Awakening. It has spoilers as well, so if you like that kind of stuff, go ahead and check it out. We'll have tons more SAO content during the break. Now that AG and Yuna are relevant again, we'll focus on Ordinal Scale, Hopeful Chant and Cordial Chords, so that'll be my first focus. Remember, if you want to continue the contents of War of Underworld where the anime left off, you're looking for Volume 17 Alicization Awakening, and start from page 53 section break. And of course, Volume 18 Alicization Lasting, the ending of the Alicization arc, is getting released next week. Amazon and Book Depository affiliate links are in the description, and I personally recommend Book Depository. But if you made it this far, do comment Annihilation Ray of Solus to let me know. Ask your questions and use hashtag AskGamerturk for weekly War of Underworld Q&A. I'll probably have more Q&As during the break, so don't worry about that. If your question is spoilery, add a spoiler warning to ensure anime-only people are not spoiled. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for all that and more. Links to light novels, manga and more are in the description as well, along with channel merch. As always, thank you very much for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members as always, and until next time, stay cool.